The USA Grand Prix delivers once again in a race that saw Ferrari cement their credentials as title challengers. It was known from the start of the weekend that McLaren weren't exactly confident of their chances in Texas. However, Ferrari's romp to a 1-2 was as comprehensive as it can get. The final races of this season are set to be an absolute slobber knocker, with teams being suited to just 1 or 2 remaining tracks, leaving the door wide open for McLaren, Ferrari, and still Red Bull in the constructors. But more importantly, this weekend saw Charles Leclerc close in on Lando Norris in the Drivers' Championship, with less than a win's worth of points separating the two drivers. We've said it before and we'll say it again, the thing that will win Verstappen a 4th championship is other drivers taking points off of each other. However, Ferrari's recent displays, with the exception of Singapore, has surely made life uncomfortable for those ahead of them. However, despite a dominant display and a 1-2 to boot, the post-race attention was focused elsewhere entirely, as yet more controversy surrounded the top 2 in the championship, and needless to say, there were some very firm opinions being thrown around. Want to know why there have been insinuations of corruption laid out following the United States Grand Prix? Of course McLaren were upset, but there was one man on the grid far more furious than even those that lost out on a podium. So before we get into the fury scene this weekend, let's get up to speed with how the events unfolded in the Lone Star State. The first corner saw both Verstappen and Norris run wide, which opened up an opportunity that both Ferrari drivers took and ran away with, as the only real road bump experienced along the way for the Scuderia was a Sainz fuel leak scare, which was quickly resolved. The near miss between the pole sitter and the man opposite was a typical run wide or else, which proved to be somewhat of a prelude to the closing stages of the race, but we'll get onto that a bit later. The Ferrari 1-2 with both drivers disappearing off into the distance may sound boring on paper, but the field behind them was anything but, with the chasing pack seeming to be shuffled every lap. The highlights behind them saw Colapinto and Lawson achieving yet more points finishes, with Lawson scoring in his first race following his return, replacing Daniel Ricciardo and proving Red Bull correct in their decision to do so, not only finishing in P9, but beating his teammate in doing so. George Russell's resurgence from the pit lane to P7 managed to somewhat save Mecedes from some major blushes this weekend, as his teammate not only qualified poorly, but had an eerily familiar exit from the race as his car switched on him at the exact same place as the recovering Russell crashed the day before. Not only did George Russell finish as well as he could have, he also finished ahead of Sergio Perez, who once again finished last out of the top 4 teams, not including the DNFing Hamilton, who based on Russell's performance may well have come home ahead of the once again underwhelming Checo. So, onto the fury. It must be said off the top, the driving between the two instants surrounding Verstappen and Norris was fantastic. The defensive display from Max in the closing stages was Raikkonen-esque, with his Red Bull seeming to be an extra foot wider and perfectly placed when it needed to be, up until the final opportunity to overtake from Norris. Equally, Norris's ability to recover and play his part in the dance was also top draw, and both drivers put on an incredibly entertaining display. However, the go wide or get stuffed approach, as well as the naivety by McLaren and Norris in believing the stewards would just go along with how they saw events unfold, ultimately left the end of the exciting engagement as a bitter affair. And no driver was more bitter than Lando Norris at the fall of the checkered flag, as he dryly insinuated that he should have given the place back, despite the reassurance he received from the team. However, despite the views of the stewards, Red Bull, and Lando's initial thoughts about possibly giving the place back, Andrea Stella was adamant that not only did the stewards get it wrong, but the fact that the team is unable to appeal has made the entire point about right and wrong moot. Here's what the McLaren team principal had to say following the race. My view is that the way that the stewards interfered with a beautiful piece of motorsport was inappropriate because both cars went off track, so both cars gained an advantage. It's a shame because it cost us a podium, it cost us a race where we stayed patient after we were pushed off in the first lap, the first corner. We accepted it. Having said very clearly our position, this kind of position by the stewards, this kind of decision cannot be appealed. For us, the chapter is now closed and we move on to the next race. Both cars went off track, so for us there was no doubt that the maneuver was correct. And the fact that the stewards can't be questioned in any regard was also brought up by Lando, who despite his frustrations that he wasn't told to give the place back, was still under the impression that what Max did was wrong. However, he was also quick to ensure that he didn't do anything to offend the officials running the race in the most backhanded way possible, as he said, It's impossible to know. They obviously can't make their minds up for a few laps, so it's obviously not an easy decision, otherwise it would have come a bit sooner. I tried, he also went off the track, so if he goes off the track, clearly he's gone in way too hard and also gained an advantage by doing what he did. But I don't make the rules, So while clearly both the McLaren team and Lando Norris were frustrated at the outcome of the lap 53 incident, there was one man more furious with how the stewards handled multiple decisions across the weekend, with Toto Wolff giving the FIA a massive yet somewhat indirect blasting following the race. As the cars crossed the finish line, George Russell decided to stir the pot, asking if Verstappen received a penalty for the lap 1 incident, and likely would have questioned the lap 55 one as well if he knew of it, likely due to him already knowing the answer and wanting to get his frustrations about the lack of consistency known across the radio. However, if George wished to be subtle in his protests, Toto Wolff decided to take his driver's frustrations and turn them up to 11, as he replied, "No, he didn't get a penalty, and at the end, Lando got a penalty for being forced off and overtaking on the outside. I guess it's a bit biased decision making, but, you know, not surprised." Which is a pretty massive claim coming from the team principal that saw a driver lose out on a championship in a way that he would likely still contend as dubious decision-making from a man that was subsequently dropped following the events at Abu Dhabi. Clearly, Toto believes that there is a deeper rot within the stewarding of the sport, with inconsistency seeming to be the least of his worries, as he seems to be alluding to downright corruption and conspiracy, as he later doubled down in an interview with Ted Kravitz. It's inconsistent. With Valtteri, it wasn't even a race. In the sprint, we saw a few of those incidents that were exactly the same and weren't penalized when racing for positions. Real positions, actually. So receiving that penalty is completely odd and bizarre. I think we know why, but I can't say that on television. Sometimes there are correlations where there is decision making that is a bit interesting. At the end of the day, it's a difficult job. Some are very good, some are trying their best, and you need to salute these guys. Now, you can banter Toto and Mecedes all you want. It's been a pretty confusing year for the Brackley team after all, but clearly the team principal has some pretty major grievances with the way that the officiating has been undertaken, even just this weekend. And whether you agree with him or not, all this points to a far bigger issue. Stella, Norris and Wolff daren't outwardly criticize the FIA and the race stewards, with both of those parties making themselves far more quivering and feeble over the past couple of years, with them punishing anyone who directly speaks out against them, swearing or not. I mean, just look at Verstappen and Ogier as just two recent examples of the FIA taking a far more tyrannical and dictatorial stance over motorsport, with their clampdown on speech becoming more and more extreme with each passing week. Regardless of whether you agree with Wolff this week, or Verstappen last month, or Hamilton a couple of years back, one thing is for sure: no matter which side you're on or which driver you blindly follow with hate being spouted towards anyone else, the recent actions taken in the name of protecting stewards are actively harming the sport. But that's just ours, Toto's, Max, Lewis's, Sebastian's point of view. If you disagree with it, feel free to let us know in the comments, and if you do agree with it and think something should be done, let us know what you think as well. But in the meantime, thank you for watching.